There we go.
Just as we're talking about workshops, I just want to plug the live workshop that Dr. Adams and I are doing in it's the beginning of June, the first weekend in June in Michigan. And that'll be one that we're co-facilitating. We did that last year and it was a lot of fun. It was a really cool group dynamic. And then we recently got word that our proposal has been accepted at the ITAP, the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, a presentation this spring. We're going to be looking over our last 10 years of running these workshops and our knowledge and our insight into helping folks who are enmeshed and their partners and their families. I mean, it's grown so much the more that we interface with these individuals. So we're going to be presenting a paper on updates, where our inquiry has led us over the last 10 years. And every time I hear Dr. Adams teach about enmeshment, he's clearer and clearer each time, which is phenomenal because 20 years ago he wrote a book that was very clear about it. So that's coming up, and that's a conference that's professionals only, but I think we'll be releasing some of what we're talking about through some videos, so I'll keep you all posted there. Our topic today is it takes a village to heal a relationship. And I wouldn't say that this came to me from one specific interaction, just something that I noticed from working with a lot of different people, people who are taking their individual recoveries seriously, and are really working earnestly. The types and the level of health, the support communities that you're involved in, be that group, individual therapy, therapy groups, that can have a really big bearing on what happens with your relationship. In fact, just a few months ago, there was a study published that I mean, it was kind of damning, actually. It implicated individual therapists in relationship failure. And the title of the study was something like Individual Therapy Can Harm Relationships. And it went to outline things that individual therapists do when meeting with someone one-on-one, a lot of times unwittingly. Things that we do that can cause harm to a relationship or make a relationship more difficult for the individual who's in it. And so that's got me thinking about, this community here and, the people who watch these videos and the positions they're in. So in the spirit of this webinar, I want to talk about this in a way of, this is something you get going early on in your recovery, hopefully, a support community. And from day one, without a lot of relationship skill, this is something that you can start to look at that really sets the chances for healing in your relationship up. It sets those chances greater if that's what you are working towards. As we want to heal this, we're committed. So we're going to talk specifically about like groups, be that 12-step support, therapy group, and some of this will even apply to your individual therapy. Some things to consider if you would like a chance to heal your relationship. So group culture is what I'm going to be referencing a lot. And basically what that means is not necessarily the rules that the group runs on, but how closely our stated mission and our lived experience align with each other. That's what group culture is. So one of the things that got me thinking about this is over my years working with folks who try to find healthy 12-step groups, trying to find a good 12-step group. And one guy recently was talking to me about, my wife found this group for partners that she really likes. Like, this is a woman who has been terrified to show up in any group, and she goes to this group and they do their group work for about an hour and a half, and then she's usually there 2 or 3 hours after, like talking with people and bonding. And he said, I like that for her, and I want an experience like that. So he got involved with the addiction side of that fellowship and a group that a lot of those spouses went to. And he held himself to my recommendation, which was go 6 times before you make a decision. Sometimes you hit a group on a real crappy day. They're not at their best, or all the weirdos showed up and none of the people who are stable. Um, so he's about 4 groups in, and he says to me, so at the beginning of every group, we read the rules, and it clearly states no crosstalk. And he said everybody laughs at that one and then commences to crosstalk through the whole meeting. And
As I am laughing here silently behind you, thinking all the meetings I go to that say no crosstalk.
um and he said that, like, I'm trying not to be judgmental. I'm trying not to just find a reason to drop this, but like, what's going on there? And I said, well, how does it feel to you? And he said, for a group of people who has really struggled to produce on what they commit, he said, it's concerning to me. He said, if the expectation from the beginning was we're going to crosstalk, like, I'd be fine with that. But he said it's explicitly no crosstalk. Ah, like, we can throw that one away. And he said, I know I need to work on that part of me that looks at commitments and rules and throws that away. So we're talking about group culture and what's the culture and how might that impact how you experience your relationship. So the first aspect we'll talk about is what's the group culture around sobriety. Now, sobriety, when it comes to like a 12-step or a support group, that is kind of the first big product that we're looking for it to produce. My guess is for a lot of you, whether you're on the trauma side or on the addiction side, or some of both, you're probably looking for, what I'm doing, what I'm working hard on. I want to feel better. I don't want to keep having the problems that I'm having, be that triggers that run away with me, ineffective boundaries, or like I'm not staying sober. So one of the first things to look at is your group's culture around sobriety. Is it something that's taken seriously? Um, is there a focus on that? Is there accountability around lapses in sobriety? Um, is there a culture of permissiveness around that? And by that, I don't mean that like everyone needs a militant group with no compassion. I'm saying when there are serious struggles with sobriety, does the group orient to that and say, this is a serious struggle? We need to pay attention to that, or we need to support you, or we need to get the bottom of what's going on. Um, or has the group been together for quite a while and there is not long-term sobriety? What you're looking at, if a group has been meeting for 3 years and folks aren't putting together years of sobriety at that point, that might be a concern about the culture of the meeting. Um, I don't necessarily agree with this completely, but I think there's some truth to it that we become the people that we spend time with. And I think one of the mistakes that we make in our relationships is we may feel like our ability to individuate and maintain our separate identity is a lot stronger than it is. And I don't necessarily think that you need to have an ironclad one. I think that's one of the beautiful things about relationships is they do change us and shift us and they help us evolve. So in that respect, with sobriety, um, I think it's important to look at what's happening in my group, what's happening in my support, even in my individual therapy. If I'm struggling with addiction and my therapist, or I'm struggling with trauma and my therapist is not putting a focus on that in the beginning, that can be off. There needs to be a good reason not to put the focus on that. Another one would be, with relationships in mind, um, what is the culture around relationship repair in the group that I'm part of? Are the people that I'm showing up and talking about it, are they experiencing that? Or does it feel more like a pyramid scheme pitch where we're all getting together and we're saying, this is the way to do it. You just have to work. If you're not getting it, you got to work harder. You're not doing it right. Um, when it comes to relationship repair, just like sobriety, you want to look at what's the track record for the people who are participating here, the people who have been around for a while saying, I'm here to help my relationship. Is their relationship being helped? And, being helped, I think is a lot. We can actually reduce it around to like, is the relationship healing? And we could look at, am I able to make clear decisions and clear judgments about my relationship? Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I think the best help a relationship can get is two people saying, you know what? We're not good for each other. Let's not do this anymore. Let's break up amicably. Or is the culture we come here and we complain a lot about our relationships and not a lot changes from week to week? And, don't get me wrong, this is hard stuff and it doesn't change overnight. But again, a group that's been going for a while should have some progress moving along, at least in some way, if it's a good setup for helping folks heal relationships. Or at the very least, if it's not like that study that pointed towards individual therapists who hurt relationships, if the group is not actively getting in the way of folks being able to heal their relationships. So one of the things that I see pop up with that is it happens either on an addicted person's side or a betrayed person's side, when progress starts to be made and the person starts to feel hopeful. Sometimes I'll see a group chime in with, well, addicts are always this way, or or spouses be crazy type of a thing. Like, don't enjoy this too much because the bottom's going to fall out. That's not a very helpful comment. And it's not even, I would say in the majority of cases, it's not even accurate, that prediction, because that prediction is so individually based. Not all relationships follow that same cycle. Sometimes we see patterns, but relationships, just like individual healing and therapy, overall patterns can be interesting and somewhat guiding, but they are not ironclad. So another thing to look at in a group, does this group think in a two-person way versus ascribing a role to the people in the group? So one thing that's really common in groups, because this is how humans work, is you can have a hierarchy form. These are our celebrities, these are our A-listers, these are our shining stars, and this is everybody else. A group that forms that and reinforces that kind of hierarchy may not be a group that really ascribes to the two-person thinking. Because what it takes to maintain that hierarchy is keeping folks down and immobile. It's about a preservation of power, celebrity status, not about, hey, you're growing and you're killing it. And, newcomers want to talk to you because you've got something that they need. And if I was the person who was kind of doing that before in the group, in a healthy group, that person would say, awesome, there's more to go around. In a group where there's a lot of insecurity, or there's a non-two-person thinking, there would be a competition now. Or at least we wouldn't be talking about that. So one thing I'm noticing a lot, I guess one of the things that I'm learning or currently thinking about relationships is, I think a lot of relationships struggle when there's too much of a identity with a role and too little focus on personhood. Now, it's a balance, of course. If you're saying we are spouses or we are partners, there are things that spouses and partners do that is independent from who we are individually. If I don't place a high premium on transparency individually, that's fine. But if I'm going to be in a relationship, the transparent partner role tends to be a pretty important one in a relationship. So in groups where there is really rigid roles and not a lot of mobility, not a lot of focus on personhood. Oh, you're 3 months sober. You should not be like, we'll take what you're saying with a grain of salt, because we know everything that comes out of the brain of a 3 month sober person is crap. If that's overt in the group, there again may be some problems with individuating and seeing individuality. A person who comes in and says, I'm only 3 months sober, I don't know how solid this is, that's different than the group saying, don't speak up, you don't know what you're talking about. Generally. Another thing to look at, is there a culture around personal responsibility, and is it reasonable? So one of the current points of entertainment in our house, our 13-year-old who's in 8th grade, he has a science teacher who I believe does not like the science teaching part of his job. And the reason why I think this is true is because most of the time my son comes home and says, this teacher insists on teaching us life skills, not science. So like the first day of class, the 40 minutes or an hour or whatever it was spent on proper handshakes. And so one of the lessons that my 13-year-old came home amused and upset about, he said, so this teacher wanted to talk to us about personal responsibility, and he started well enough. He said, so if you turn in an assignment late and the teacher doesn't grade it, whose fault is that? And the class generally said, oh, that would be the student's fault. You should get your stuff in on time, or, if you don't get it on time, you got to understand there might be consequences. And he says, right. And he goes through these increasingly extreme scenarios, and then he says, if you're driving your car and you go through an intersection and somebody T-bones you, whose fault is that? And the class is like, well, it's the fault of the other driver. And he says, no, you could have left at a different time and avoided that. And the thing that my son was amused by is he said it was mutiny. We were like, no, that's not, like, you're wrong about that. And he was, insisting, I have a lot of life experience and this is the way it is. That to me would be an unreasonable culture of personal responsibility. So it's not about I'm responsible for everything that happens to me in my life, or I'm responsible for none of it. It's all my partner's fault. Both of those extremes, I think, are unreasonable. I think of the serenity prayer in the 12 steps. Accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There is a culture of personal responsibility that I think has some reasonableness. There are some things that are in my control and I ought to be looking at. And there are some things that are outside of my control and I ought to be looking at acceptance. So one of the reasons why I think that's tricky for a relationship, a group culture that's unreasonable personal responsibility, is that starts to bleed over. If this is how my group does it, they're telling me this is how it works, I can start to do that in my relationship. And again, instead of keeping the focus of the relationship on personhood, which in personhood, like, we have flaws and we have shortcomings, we also have strengths and we have successes. It turns it into a role. There's winners and losers. There's the right and the wrong here, which I'll tell you from my years of experience as a couples therapy, never, ever, ever helpful. Never have I seen that culture be helpful for a couple. How does my group talk about their struggling partner? Is there reasonableness? Is there compassion? Is there an attempt to really understand? Now, understanding and agreement are not the same thing. So when I see, I'm thinking about a specific partner that I worked with a while ago. She really started to get a very compassionate understanding for not just her spouse's addiction, but his attachment issues. And she really struggled with that in the beginning because she said, I can see that this comes from a very hurt place. Am I just supposed to be okay with that? And I would say to her, oh, what do you think? And she said, I'm glad I have the compassion, but I still can't tolerate, like, just because I see a reason that it's there, I don't think I can tolerate or forgive or excuse. And I said, that sounds right to me. So in your culture of support, are we talking about all of those dirty, dirty addicts? Are we talking about all of those crazy betrayed partners? One thing that I saw in my men's group a couple years ago, we had a guy who was new to join, and this is not uncommon, for guys who are new to recovery. He was really, really struggling with personal responsibility and empathy towards his spouse. And he spoke up one day in a check-in, and he was venting some feelings about my crazy spouse and why does she respond this way. And I think he said something like, who peed in her Cheerios? And another guy in the group, been a seasoned member, he let him finish, and he said, point of feedback if I can. And the guy said, sure. And he said, you peed in her Cheerios. And he said, I can understand that you're frustrated and you're upset and you need to vent, but I want you to know, in this group, that doesn't fly. Like, we don't stop there. He said, it's been really important for me in my own recovery to understand how I set the stage for my spouse to feel the way that she does. And he said, that's what we need to do here. And I've seen that with spouses before too. This like monolithic, you're not a human being anymore, you're an addiction machine. that line of like, at the end of the day, we're married to a human being, or we're partnered with a human being, and we need to remember that there's that side that deserves our compassion, empathy, and understanding. Again, not the same as agreement or excuse, but a group that allows a person you're struggling with to stay human and not become this extreme caricature of an enemy. What that does too, that keeps the focus on you and the decisions you have to make, not on everything would be okay if my defective partner stopped being defective. Does the outside thing stay in its lane? So whether it's a group or a therapist, does it stay in its own lane? I've talked about this before. One of my pet peeves with individual therapists is when they start telling me about the person's spouse. So when I'm seeing a couple and I reach out to an individual therapist and they say, you ought to know this, this, and this about their spouse. And I'll say to them, have you met their spouse before? Have you assessed their spouse before? And like 100% of the time, the answer is no. And I'll say, I'll kindly ask you to refrain from giving me insights about their spouse because you're not staying in your own lane there. If you need that assessment, like please invite them in, like get eyes on this yourself so you can cooperate and know what's going on. So the group or the therapist or whatever that tries to do more than it can do with you individually, that's outside the lane. And that can be concerning. Again, there you can get narratives about who your partner supposedly is that have nothing to do with your partner. You can get folks who, instead of sharing about here's my current experience, what I'm going through in my relationship, they'll say all recovering relationships are like this. That's outside the lane. So watch for that boundary. And one last thing I put there, and I talked about this in the beginning, the culture around commitment, structure, and rules. So do we set commitments for ourselves that we blow off and we think that's a big joke? That's hugely undermining in trust. Are we realistic about our flaws? So to say like, yeah, there's no crosstalk, and to have that be an issue that comes up frequently in our group conscience. Hey guys, we're struggling with crosstalk. What do we want to do about that? Because at the end of the day, the thing that helps our relationships is not developing a love for the people in a relationship with. It's a commitment to treat them right. It's a commitment to do the things that we said we would do and not to commit to things that we aren't interested or capable of doing. So you want to look at the group culture that you're in and their culture around commitment and structure, rules, accountability. That could be one of the biggest benefits I see for someone in recovery is when they have a group that's high on accountability. What they tend to do is they start bringing that accountability home. They start bringing that accountability into a lot of their other relationships, and that's very, very helpful. So just a couple of suggestions on how to find or cultivate a healthy group culture. So number one is try out lots multiple times. Even if you're with something that feels pretty good, remember one of the hallmarks of a healthy system is we're open to outsiders. So even if you have a good thing going, it's good to shop around. Not necessarily from a commitment perspective, but I'll drop in on other meetings. I get fresh perspectives. I get fresh ideas. That's good for a group to have things from the outside coming in. There's a thing called group think, which is essentially the echo chamber we get in when we're with people that we're comfortable with. That doesn't yield the best thinking always. It yields other things like familiarity, comfort, acceptance, like all those things are important. Systems are helped by fresh influence. When you look at groups, look at the sponsorship and peer support element. Again, is it reasonable? Do we have sponsors who set themselves up as a little g God in your life? Or do we have sponsors who come alongside and are firm and direct with you and also respectful of your autonomy, who are upfront, have good boundaries? And then a question that would be interesting to think about is if my partner were to show up and meet these people, how much of the dynamic would change here? And why would it change? So, for example, if in an addiction recovery group, we talk more bare knuckle about what's going on. And if that language cleans up or alters or becomes less abrasive, that's a change I could understand. We know what our audience is. Talking with a group of addicts who struggle is very different than talking about spouses. So that sensitivity that's increased versus if we spend a lot of time in our group bagging on our spouses and they show up and everyone's all smiles and, so good to meet you. It'd be an interesting thought experiment. I think very rarely do those worlds collide, but it'd be an interesting thought experiment to think what would change if my partner showed up and met these people, and why would it change? So those are my thoughts for now on it takes a village to heal a relationship.
Great stuff. I agree 100% across the board. I can say that when I look for a group, whether it's a therapy group or a 12-step group or any kind of group, men's group, whatever, I want to know, are we focused on accountability and solutions? Or are we just going to sit here and whine and not make any changes? Because I don't need that second option. I'm wasting my time. I always look for accountability and solution focused. And it's about 2/3 of the meetings in my area are accountability and solution focused. And about 1/3 of them are the guys who want to sit there and just whine and kvetch and guess which group stays sober. Guess which group grabs a newcomer and says, you're coming to dinner with us. And the newcomer says, I don't have any money. And we say, we don't care. We'll pay. You're coming anyway. We want to get to know, that's what I look for. I do have a question because you brought this, it's the last thing you brought about. What if the spouse went to a 12-step group? And Tammy and I were doing our webinar yesterday. We were actually talking about 12-step groups. And one of the betrayed partners said, I want to attend meetings with my partner. Is that kosher? And I'm curious to hear your response. And we're talking specifically about sexual recovery meetings.
Yeah. So you correct me if I'm wrong, Scott. There are meetings that they call them open meetings, and that means anyone can attend. And then there are meetings that are called closed meetings, and that means you need to identify with the problem that we are facing here. Here's a thought. I think recovery is a deeply personal thing. And I think individuation, that ability to differentiate ourselves from our partner, to have a space, the way that I work on it within Mesh Men is we talk about Marilyn Murray's circles of intimacy. And one of the things that I drive home with these men is your circle one, that innermost circle, only you and your higher power can exist there. Like it's not that no one else is invited. They cannot exist there. It's like trying to raise a guinea pig at the bottom of the ocean. It's just not the right environment. So having a part of us that we can step back into, even from our relationships, is absolutely essential in supporting the health of that relationship. So a couple thoughts here. There are meetings like Recovery Couples Anonymous that are for couples in recovery, that's you identify as a couple in recovery, please, everybody come here. I think it can be problematic for someone who doesn't identify. And I've been a part of, so in the place that I live, there's a big network of 12-step meetings that they're not peer facilitated. They get volunteers to facilitate, and those volunteers are not often addicts in recovery. And I'll tell you, the dynamic when you have someone who does not identify and is full of their own emotion and their own judgment, understandably so, it makes it a very unsafe meeting. So I would look at some different ways that you could get at the safety and transparency that you're needing. That may be, is there a partners meeting in mirror with this? Could I get involved with that group? It could be an agreement you and your partner have after group, not to share the specifics in the meeting because that violates confidentiality, but can we talk afterward about what you felt and what you experienced and what went on for you in that meeting? I don't see a lot of long-term benefit to showing up and checking. If your partner doesn't have that discernment, that's one of the things they need to develop themselves, is where I go. Am I leaving my relationship at the door? Or am I remembering that I'm a part of a relationship? And just like what I talked about today, is the thing that I'm a part of, is it supportive of the relationship that I'm choosing?
Yeah, thank you. That actually was very validating and confirming to hear you give essentially the same answer. Like RCA is for couples. And even in an open meeting, most S meetings and most sex and porn meetings are closed,
Yeah.
because having somebody who's not an addict would have a real dampening effect on the shares. And my
Mhm.
response was, even if it's an open meeting, I would ask your partner to ask the group if it's okay if you come next week, and it would be a one, I mean, I would, it would like to have a wives week or whatever, because
Yeah.
but yeah, it would it would really make it unsafe for a lot of people. So I'm glad you kind of, okay, let's jump into the questions because there's lots of them today. How often should a new participant in sex addiction recovery, if they are a porn addict, um, go to meetings? Once a week, 3 times a week? So this, I guess, is about porn addiction, but I think we can generalize to any addiction. How many meetings?
The dosage is about whether sobriety is achieved or not. So, not to go into too much gross detail, but a couple years ago, I got an ear infection and I went on antibiotics that wiped out my gut flora, and it was awful. And the thinking could be, well, I just got done with antibiotics. Why do I need to do more?
Mhm.
And actually, it actually started, I was on 2 rounds of antibiotics for the ear infection because it didn't clear it up. I went on a separate round of antibiotics to clear up the ear infection. Then I had to go on a different round of antibiotics to clear up the gut problems that I was
And
having.
those antibiotics are horrible.
Oh man, it was a month of like,
Yes.
if I'm not better or dead at the end of this month, I
Yeah.
will do that. So I would say here, it's not a set. It's the goal initially is sobriety, and what happens I see between meetings, and this is why meetings are important. Meetings are like the trellis that you train a plant on. And if you're growing away from that trellis, away from that form, you need more contact points.
Yeah.
So if you're starting meetings and you're struggling to get sober, do more meetings, good meetings. When you stabilize your sobriety, you have to look at a couple things. First of all, if it was going to meetings that was working for me, why would I stop once I get sober? Because it can work in reverse too. And the other thing would be to look at, there is an acute like treatment phase where when I'm clawing to get sober and get oriented to recovery, I may need a lot more meetings than I need down the road. So I would say it's more based on need and not your subjective understanding what you need, because that's more like, this is what I want it to be. It's, am I producing sobriety? Am I getting oriented to recovery? And if the answer is I'm struggling with that, you need more frequent meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. I always, newcomers, when they ask me this question, I say, why don't you try 90 meetings in 90 days and then we'll revisit the topic?
Perfect.
Um, and they'll say, well, I can't possibly go to a meeting every day. And I say, did you act out every day?
Yeah.
And they say, well, yeah. And how much time? And they'll be like 2, 3, 4. I'm like, you can go to a meeting every day, can't you? Um, and I mean, one is not enough. I'll throw that down as a blanket statement from me. One is not enough. I'm 20 plus years sober, and I go to about 3 meetings a week. And sometimes I'll say, you know what, I'm gonna do 30 meetings this month, and I'll do a meeting every day just to because I need more touch points. I love the trellis analogy. So yeah. But you're right. However many you need to go to is how many you need to go to.
I love that idea of 90 and 90 because I think that is like, I don't know, back in the day when penicillin was new, I think that's a shot of penicillin. Like, it's just a good
Mhm.
leveler, it's a good orientation. It really helps you understand what meetings are about as well. If you have infrequent contact with meetings, it's really hard to get the rhythm and to understand how it's useful. And that's where, if I'm putting incorrect words in your mouth, Scott, I think that's where Scott would say now, if I need 30 meetings in 30 days, I'll do that because he
Mhm.
understands. He's had experience with, this is how it flows, this is how it works, this is what it does for me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also 90 and 90 or 30 and 30, whatever you want to do, it helps you become part of. And addiction is a disease of being apart from. And recovery is about remedying that. It's an intimacy disorder, and we need to start feeling connected. And 90 meetings in 90 days, you start to know people, they start to know you, they'll say hi, they recognize you, they'll come in and see you sitting there and they'll plop down next to you and you're like, oh, cool. You know, it makes a real difference.
Yeah.
When or if should a partner be checking in with the addict spouse to discuss their recovery, level of sobriety, relapses, etc.?
Again, here, the skill that I'm seeing that needs to develop is transparency. This isn't about double checking or policing or seeing if you're walking a line. It's about injecting transparency into the relationship. So I think daily check-ins are important, and not just about sobriety, relapses, anything like that, but like learning how to talk about how have you been feeling today? What are you thinking about today? There's a lot of different check-in formats out there. I would say, instead of, whenever I get these questions about what's the right frequency, I think it's generally the wrong question, because it's usually coming from an orientation for like, how do we control this, or what's right, versus what's needed. And that is really what recovery is about, is a thriving relationship with yourself that can be responsive to needs, not following prescriptions and then, scratching our head, why isn't this working? There's good general advice out there. But at the end of the day, you have to custom make everything for a relationship, and it's custom built based on needs.
Yeah. Next one here. I'm having a problem with porn and feel like the sex addict meetings are not helpful for me because I didn't do those things with people, but with my devices. Is this a valid feeling or is it all basically equivalence?
Well, we used to think it was all basically equivalent. Actually, Dr. Rob has been one of the leading voices here, looking at porn addiction and sex addiction are different animals. And thankfully, there are more porn-specific fellowships emerging, like PA, Porn Addicts Anonymous.
Mhm.
A huge part of what I think is healing about the steps is easy recognition with myself here. So I've gotten value out of going to AA meetings. But I would imagine, if early in my recovery, if all I did was go to AA meetings, I don't think I would have gotten value out of meetings, because I needed something specific to what I was struggling with. Later in recovery, um, that whole like addiction is addiction. And when I hear an alcoholic talk about, their struggle with alcohol, which has not been my struggle, when I look at, my struggles, I can see resonance. Oh yeah, I know a bit about what that's about. But I do think early in recovery, a specific identity in your meetings is really important.
Yeah, I 100% agree. In the last decade plus, there's essentially been a pornography explosion in the online world. And we're seeing more and more and more straight up porn addicts, who just
Yeah.
don't do anything real world. Um, that's why groups like PAA and SPAA and PA, the porn specific 12-step groups have popped up. We have those listed on our website under resources. You can find those easily. It's also why we, instead of just offering sex addiction work groups online, we offered some porn addiction specific work groups for people like you, and you can find that on our Seeking Integrity website. There. Um, and because a lot of porn addicts they kind of struggle to be in a room with somebody who identifies with the sex as a sex addict and has had sex with 400 strangers in the last year, whatever. Um, so yeah, your feelings are absolutely valid.
Yep.
Speaking of individual therapy, in my first meeting with a male therapist who was not a CSAT, he told me he didn't think I was a sex addict and that the women I touched inappropriately were unconsciously grooming me. Now, I'll give the counselor a break, as this was our first encounter and maybe I minimized my role in this behavior. But overall, I was surprised with this quick diagnosis. Should I stay with him or should I go? Jon, take it.
Dude, your gut's good here. I'm surprised with the quick diagnosis. I sometimes spend a year or more investigating what's going on before I start to feel like, oh, I've got a clear picture of this. So, when I talk about a culture of reasonable accountability, that may be a therapist who's more concerned with you not feeling shame
Yeah.
than it is a therapist that it wants to help you take a real look, even if it's painful, at your behavior. So your gut is good there, I think, when you're saying, I'm surprised by this quick diagnosis. Um, I think in the end, therapy should help us feel better. And I think most of the time, therapy should help us feel better. But sometimes that feeling better comes through someone sitting with you and putting a loving arm around you, figuratively, not literally. Your therapist should not be touching you that way. Um, Figurative loving arm around you saying, this is so hard to look at, isn't it? Let's not flinch. Let's talk about this. Um, and I'll see with some clients of mine who are more on the manipulative side and the minimizing side. I learned this the hard way early in my career. I was trying to make them feel good instead of really challenging them, and they didn't respect me and they didn't stay around. Go figure. Um, BSers know BS when they hear it. So yeah, I would say trust your gut on that.
Yeah, and if you need help finding a CSAT, email us at Seeking Integrity, Tammy, Tami at Seeking Integrity, or me, Scott at Seeking Integrity, which I will forward to Tammy, and she will get back to you with CSATs in your area. Let us know where you live. If
Yep.
you're near Salt Lake, obviously call John. But we can only practice in our own state, so we'll help you find one in your area, and we're happy to do that.
Yep.
Why are you calling partners crazy? Why are you referring to traumatized partners that way? We're not. Go
Well,
ahead, tell me.
I have to apologize. I wasn't clear. I do this in therapy sometimes, and it confuses my clients. I slip into a voice that is somebody else. That's not me.
Right.
So I was voicing unhelpful opinions in a group.
Yeah.
Um, that term, it is terms that I've heard people in
Yeah.
recovery use. And I was using that voice as an example of this is not helpful. If you are hearing this in your support groups, it's not supportive of your relationship or your healing there. So I apologize. I didn't make that clearer. I hope that you have not been sitting with so much pain before I could address that. And
Yeah.
yeah, I
No.
do not think betrayed partners are crazy. I don't think that's a fair
No.
term.
No. Nobody that's at or affiliated with Seeking Integrity ever thinks that. We look at partners as being in crisis and hurting and needing validation and support. Um, when people are in crisis, sometimes they behave in ways that aren't always the best thing to do, but it's
Well,
because you're in crisis. People in crisis are
I I
pretty intense.
usually I usually find all behavior makes sense, but the bigger the crisis, the further down you have to drill
Yeah,
to, oh, okay, it makes so much sense why it looks this way. And
right.
I have yet to meet a betrayed partner that I have not had that experience. Sometimes I get head scratch, and I get this with addicts too. I get this head scratching behavior, and once I know enough of the story, it's like, oh, okay, I totally get.
Yeah,
This actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But trade partner is not crazy. Crisis, yes. Crazy, no. I'm frustrated because my SA, who only had sex with devices, now wants me to feel sorry for him. Oh, so devices, not actual sex with the phone, but sex using the phone. Uh, Now wants me to feel sorry for him while we are 3 months from shock of discovery. No shock for him. He was obviously aware. So I resent his demands for comfort from me when I'm reeling. At this point, I feel like my emotions are too hard for me to regulate without trying to make him feel better about his secret life. How should I handle this? This is a common question.
Yeah.
Addicts have known about it forever and they're feeling relief when they get caught.
Yeah.
And betrayed partners just got run over by a truck.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think this is unfortunately this is often a boundary, like all boundaries that you set for yourself, you have to maintain over and over again. And I have seen with the addicts that I work with this sense of like, can't you understand why I'm reeling? They really can't, because like you said, Scott, they're relieved that
Yeah.
it came out mostly. So you have to think of some other ways to describe it. One way of describing this is uh, so I'm going to slip into this voice now. This is not me. I'm saying it as if I was in the situation. I would say something like, "Sweetie, you have to understand that what you've been doing over these years and keeping a secret from me, that is like spending money on a credit card and bankrupting the bank accounts. And that account is goodwill, compassion, patience. I didn't know that you were spending all of my patience until it all came out, and I'm bankrupt when it comes to patience and compassion for you. I want that to return quickly, but I can't spend what I don't have. Um, so I need you to get your compassion and understanding from your sponsor, your 12-step group, your therapist. You deserve it. You should have, like, what you're going through is not easy. You should have compassion and patience. I need you to understand I don't have it from you because I'm reeling from the way you kicked me in the stomach. Um, that's the approach, that's the boundary there. And it, like Scott said, this is so common. And a lot of folks who struggle with addiction, go figure, they're not super secure in themselves or their emotions. And so this is part of their learning is, in anything that we want to have an abundance in our life, we have to diversify. So this may be a guy who it took all he had to be as vulnerable as he was, no matter how small that was, with you. One of the things he's working on is being vulnerable with others so that he can get needs met and he can feel connected and he can feel, valuable within himself and his communities. So this is a case of like focus on your own side of the street. It's okay to, as gently as you can, point him back to, or as directly as you need to, point him back to, you've got work to do. I can't fill that hole, especially not right now. Yeah.
This question refers to the educational portion that you did today. Will you be posting this list? John, if you would like me to post them on our website, I'm happy to do it. Just email them to me and I'll put the list down for everybody.
I can add it to my to-do list. Whether or not it gets done before Scott's ready to post, we're all rolling the dice on that.
I'm always ready to post. So in a 12-step SAA program, oh, this is from Natick. I'm in a 12-step program here in Portland, SAA. There is no crosstalk. What we do is talk afterwards with the individual in question. This works well. That's what we do in my group usually, although I did giggle because sometimes we do crosstalk. My home group is known as the Poorly Behaved Old Timers group. But we are also a group that is very solution focused and we're very welcoming and we're very accountable and all of those other things that John talked about. And the guys stay sober. Even the newcomers who come in, they keep coming back because they stay sober. It seemed like groups are word of mouth only. I went online and looked for sex addiction, SA, and porn addict groups near me and groups for my spouse and found none within 2 hours distance. Is there again, our website, seekingintegrity.com, look on our resources. We list all the groups. And some of the groups, especially the porn groups, are newer and they're mostly online. If you're in a big city, obviously you're going to have much better chance of getting. These
Yeah.
programs are not as widespread as AA, which is every small town on the planet has meetings every day.
Yeah.
Very different. Go ahead, John. You wanted to add to
I
that?
was just gonna say, any meeting that's purporting to be affiliated with any 12-step fellowship would be listed on the website. So if you're on that website, you're not finding things in your area, try phone groups.
Yeah.
There are
And Zoom
and
groups too. Yeah.
Zoom groups. Yeah, yeah. There's some fantastic online and phone resources right now. So a lot of people, I felt this way too before the pandemic, honestly, that like Zoom everything was crap. And it's not. It's really effective. You just you have to open up some flexibility in yourself. But yeah, just echo what Scott said. S fellowships are not as prolific as AA, and it's unfortunate. It's needed.
Yeah.
Getting there.
Yeah, they're certainly becoming more prolific, but it's slower. You're correct. There's just a comment. Key ingredient of 12-step immersion is that you're part of something. Yeah, definitely. Partner of a porn addict here. 1 month out from disclosure, 6 months post D-Day. I'm struggling so much with feeling like I'm not enough for my spouse. I feel confident in myself apart from him, but when I'm with him, insecurity consumes me. I know his addiction wasn't about me, but that doesn't change how it feels in my body. I'm pouring into myself in ways I know fuel my soul and build my relationship with myself, but I still can't shake this debilitating insecurity, et cetera, et cetera. How do I get out of this state?
Yeah. So the word that I would go to there, it's reclaiming. So you've got the right mental infrastructure. I know it's not about me, but the feeling is still there. So it's one thing to say to your partner, I love you and you only. It's another thing to behave that way. And that's one of the things that was broken in addiction is your partner may be genuine in saying, I feel this way. You are the only person for me, but they haven't behaved that way. And until you're confident, which again is that's not through ideas expressed, that's through behavior given, until you're confident that yeah, your sexual self, your love, like that is for us only. You don't spend that elsewhere. That takes time and specific committed behavior seen over and over and over again, to start to shake that feeling. And I would say keep going down that road of your personal work. A lot of us, maybe this is not popular. A lot of us have a lot of insecurity right under the surface, even when we feel like we're doing better. And this one about like my enoughness, for most of the people I know, it doesn't take a lot to tip us over into that. And that's not a problem with us. Like you're not broken in that way. It's a vulnerability. And so continue to get really good support and working on that part of you that has a hard time holding on to and feeling your worth. Because it's like I said, I think for everybody, it's very easily dislodged. Um,
Yeah. You have time for one more, John?
yeah.
Okay. My porn addict denied me sex, and now I know it was due to porn getting all of their interest. Now the addict wants to reinitiate sex, and I'm feeling like I may not ever get over the rejection and repulsion after 40 years of that. I wonder at this point why I would ever, but they are a sex addict. So if they are sober, in quotation marks, now they think I have to make up the void. Thoughts on that?
This is easy in the answer, not the situation is easy, but sobriety doesn't heal everything. Sobriety doesn't fix everything. All sobriety is getting sober. So there's this whole other side to sex and sexuality and partnership that is not about the transaction. How often are we doing this? Or, are you open? Should you be open? There's this whole other side. And that's about empathy. That's about understanding. I think sex is actually a really wonderful part, a really wonderful place for our broken parts to show up, our broken parts to show up if we're with someone who's really caring. It can be very healing. And that whole like, I'm sober, so now your turn. Uh, that at best is an immature understanding of what it will take to heal that. Sobriety is a good first step, but I see this both with addicts and partners all the time. They put way too much stock in how much sobriety fixes. There's hard work. Sobriety. I've said it to clients this way before after their first year of sobriety, and they'll say, it's getting really hard. I'm feeling a lot. And I'll say, congratulations. That's your reward for a year of sobriety is now you get to do the really hard stuff. So yeah, if your spouse is listening, or if you get your spouse to listen, my word to them would be, you got more work to do. Sobriety is a big accomplishment, but it does not fix everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, healthy sex is an expression of healthy emotional intimacy. Um, and until that healthy emotional intimacy, the safety, the willingness to be mutually vulnerable and open and honest, and is there. I mean, I don't blame you for not wanting to have sex. I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
Um, so we are out of time. We had another question come in, but I'll save it till next week, or 2 weeks from now. So I promise we will answer. This will be the first question we answer at the start of the next session. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for the great questions, John. Always a great topic. Anything you want to add to take us out?
Thank you, everybody. I'll look forward to being back here in 2 weeks.
Okay, excellent. And with that, bye
Bye.
all.